Hello Fearseekers, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to be diving into some disturbing, allegedly true, deep woods horror stories. If you enjoy the content and want to help the channel grow, consider leaving a like and subscribing to keep up with future videos. Now without further ado, sit back, put any idea of sleep away, and get ready to ferment your fears. I was hiking across Newfoundland, following an old railway that was long ago disassembled and turned into a giant trail, sleeping wherever I found myself at night. One day I ran into a small cottage town, except everything was abandoned. Trailers falling apart, bus conversions burnt out, small cabins all shuttered up. It was creepy but interesting at the same time. The sun was waning, so I decided to set up camp in a mostly empty lot that had an abandoned truck slowly falling into a ravine near it. Cooked up some food and crawled into my tent to sleep. I wake up sometime in the night and I hear footsteps outside my tent. At first I think it's an animal, but the steps sound like someone walking, a human. The steps get closer and go around my tent. I slowly and quietly pull out my knife. If he tries to get in, my plan is to stab first and ask questions later. Anyone trying to get into my tent at night in the middle of nowhere is looking to do some kind of harm. My heart is racing at this point, but I try to just be quiet. Luckily, the steps start moving away from the tent until I can't hear them anymore. I wait a bit to see if they'll come back, but I don't hear anything. I slowly get out of my tent. I don't see anything. Without turning on my flashlight, I quickly take down everything and stuff it into my bag. After that, I just started walking down the trail to get the hell out of there. I walked until daytime, came across a road and flagged down a truck. That guy was nice and drove me to town where I got a hotel. The creepy thing, when I think back to it, was that whoever that was likely watched me walk into town from one of the abandoned structures. I'm guessing a squatter. I'd like to think he was just curious, but I'm glad I didn't stay and wait to see if he'd be back. I was hiking a section of the North Umpqua Trail, northern part of southern Oregon, a few years back with my sister-in-law. It's a 72-mile trail broken into sections that can be easily hiked in a day. At the time, I lived about midway up the trail, fairly remote in a small community. It was mid-fall this one day when we set out. The trail was running along the south side of the North Umpqua River and was pretty up and down in the beginning. We made it to a fairly flat section that was running just above the river. There was this beautiful view of the river through the trees, so we stopped to get some pictures and take a water break. I immediately felt extremely uncomfortable, like someone was watching us. I slowly turned my head to look behind us, across the trail and up a very small incline. Through the trees I could see a small meadow. Across the meadow, maybe 15 yards from us, was a tent. An old canvas-style tent. As I'm looking, I notice bones strung from the trees all around the meadow, like creepy death wind chimes. My stomach just clenched and dropped. I leaned into my sister-in-law and whispered, "Do not turn around and look behind us. Just continue walking up the trail and run when I tell you." We were close enough to the river that nobody not right next to us could have heard this. She did exactly as I told her to, setting off at the brisk walk we'd been at before. We got maybe 10 yards and I could hear footsteps through the forest floor, coming from behind and slightly above us. That part of the forest is very dense. There is a thick moss cover under the trees, so footsteps on it make a very specific sound. I leaned forward and told her to pick up her speed. She did, I did, and so did whoever was behind us. I leaned forward again and told her to run as fast as she could and not stop until I told her to. For two middle-aged women, both slightly overweight, we ran like the damn wind. I just kept telling her, "Go, go, go!" I could see ahead of us that the trail made an incline and veered to the right along the river and around a cliff. I knew at that point that whoever it was going to have to come down onto the trail or stop. We kept running. We probably ran at least a mile after that, even though we could no longer hear anyone behind or above us. That section of the trail was about 9 miles, and we were not halfway when this happened. We eventually slowed down, but just hurried as fast as we could the rest of the way. We had arranged for her younger brother, not my ex, to pick us up. We made it to the next trailhead fairly early, so we made our way out to 138 and started walking east towards home, knowing he'd find us. He did, and was shocked at our story. We got home and immediately called our local sheriff, who lived just above us at the ranger station. He came to the house and heard our story. He explained it might be a day or two before they could get in on the trail, as they had a missing hunter at the time they were searching for. So a few days go by and he shows up at our house to let me know that we were not crazy or imagining things, and someone really did chase us. I asked what they found and who it was. He looked down at the ground and then looked up and said, "I'm not going to tell you what we found or who it was, because if I do, you will never hike anywhere again. What we found was not normal and will not happen up here again." He then instructed me to never ever hike unarmed again. I never found out what they found or who it was. I never hiked that section of trail again, and it completely burnt last year. I also never hiked unarmed ever again. That was huge for me, as I was not a gun person. I had many incidents living up there in a national forest with wild animals and other strange things, but nothing ever scared me as much as that day. Walking a section of the Appalachian Trail with a couple of buddies when we happened across a bundle of sticks. The sticks were made into a figure, kinda similar to the ones from the Blair Witch Project. It was obviously placed there by someone, as it was dead center on the middle of the trail, leaning against a rock. I thought it was cool, so I grabbed it and put it in my backpack. Anyway, we finished the hike and set up for the night in our camping spot. We were all pretty wiped out from the long day, so after dinner we retired to our respective tents and conked out for the night. The next morning I was the first one awake, so I got up to make the coffee, and what did I find? An identical bundle of sticks to the one we'd found, sitting atop the pile of charred wood from the previous night's fire. First thing I did was check my pack, and sure enough, the one I'd picked up was still there. Each of my friends swore they didn't put it there, and I obviously said the same. It was weird because we were all adamant about not putting it there, but I can never be sure one of them wasn't messing with the other two of us. The thing that messes with me is the bundle I found in the morning was almost an exact replica of the one we found on the trail earlier. And I find it hard to believe one of the other guys could have made such a close replica without being able to model it after the one in my pack. And it's not like either would have placed the one on the trail beforehand for us to stumble upon, as it was far out in the middle of nowhere. I want to believe one of them pulled a prank on the other two, because the alternative scares the crap out of me. Was somewhere in the middle of the White Mountains in the summer when I walked into what looked like a scene from a horror movie. A person with zero hiking, camping, or any related experience had gotten themselves in trouble. Big trouble. It was around 7 a.m. when I found the campsite. First thing that hit me was the eerie stillness, until I noticed the shredded tent under a tree and the desperate-looking human figure covered in blood, whimpering quietly. I put my bag down, grabbed my kit, and went over to the person. They looked like they had just lost a knife fight with 4 armed men. Deep slashes from one shoulder to hip, single punctures up and down his back, and hands and forearms full of what looked to be defensive cuts. I patched him up the best I could, gave him water, checked my map, and hightailed it to the closest road. This was before cell phones were super prevalent and barely worked in the mountains. Thankfully, the road was very close by, less than 2 miles, and I was able to flag someone down. They took off, and I waited for assistance to arrive. It took about an hour until rescue arrived, and I led them to the still unidentified individual. He was not very conversive when I helped him out. I was sure he would be dead before we arrived, but I was wrong. I assisted rescue bringing him out and took them up on their offer to head into town and get cleaned up. After cleaning up and getting myself situated at their station, I went on my way, leaving them my number to call to let me know what was up with the person we helped out. I got home 3 days later and there was a message on my machine. The story was that the guy I found decided to go camping one day and heard that he had to keep food hung from a tree to keep bears away. Well, he did that, but put it almost directly over his tent, and not high enough. The night before I happened upon the site, a bear had used the tent and its occupant, attempting to climb the tree to get to the food. The guy had woken up to 4 black bear paws sinking into his body, shifting to reach up. Dude survived and swore to the hospital staff that he was moving to the city and never going into the woods again. I posted this on another thread back in August, but I figured I'd share again. Of the countless hours I've spent in the woods, it's the one time, the only few seconds, that I can't explain. I distance hike when I can. Sometimes this means getting up early or staying out late to get as many miles in as possible. Sometimes walking in the pitch dark with a low-light headlamp gets spooky. I grew up in the woods of this area. I've slept under our canopy of stars more nights than I can count. I've trekked thousands of miles of trail, riverbank, lakeshore, ridge, bottoms, bogs, and creeks. I've hunted the game. I'm establishing this because it's important you understand I've heard, seen, and smelt about all this region has to offer in the way of wilderness. My scariest experience, though, happened at about 4:30 in the morning. It was late spring, so the first morning light wouldn't be visible in the treetops for another 30 to 45 minutes. Another hour past that until sunrise. I was on mile 5. I'm in a low bottom that's wedged between 2 steep ridges. The trail I'm on was narrow, muddy, and completely hemmed in by thick underbrush, young maple, and old oak growth. I'm focused on the small light from my headlamp, just one step after the other, zoned out. Then I heard a loud crack, and I froze solid. This is the part I have trouble describing. 4:30 in springtime means I'm the only thing making noise. No birds chirping, nothing. Dead quiet. Mid-step, I froze. When fight or flight kicks in, you have these immediate instinct thoughts. The thought that instantly flashed in my mind as I stood there balancing myself into silence was, if I hear that again, I'm turning around and I'm going back the way I came in a hurry. Why? Because that sound was not a branch breaking. It wasn't deadfall. It wasn't a widowmaker. I was damn sure I had just heard something intentional. Hearing it twice, well, that meant get out of here. To describe it as best I can, it sounded like a decent-sized wooden stick being violently whacked against a smallish tree. more a fungo bat-sized stick than a baseball bat. The distinction in my head being that this sound was a crack and not a thud or thump. And I have described it as explosive in the past because it was so sudden and so terribly loud. I had the sense that it was about 50 yards directly in front of me, and it was loud and clear. Now, as I stood there, completely spooked, I realized the soon-to-be worst part of my situation. I knew where the sound came from, and I knew where the trail went. In about 30 yards, I was going to come to a 180-degree turn and start up the ridge going away from the creek. This meant as soon as I got the courage to move towards this noise, I was going to have to turn my back to it and get up that ridge. This made me very nervous. My head somewhere between meth fiend murder and Bigfoot bludgeoning. Minutes pass. I just breathe my foggy breath into my glasses and listen. Nothing. Dead quiet. I've got about 20 to 30 minutes until first light. I crank up the headlamp and start to slowly creep to the 180-degree turn. When you wear a headlamp in the woods at night, every tree branch in front of you casts a big black moving shadow on the trail. It didn't help. I get to the turn and quickly make the bend. I'm moving pretty fast at this point, trying to be quiet, taking tiny, shallow breaths so I can listen while humping it up the trail. And then I smell it. A stench hits me that I can't describe. I just imagined wet, rotten death. I've actually worked scenes where humans have expired as a firefighter. This was like days-old decomposition, but it just smelled strange. I kept walking fast. By the time I made the top of that ridge, I was huffing and the first light was showing. I didn't stop moving until full light was out and the birds were chirping. I've heard it all in our woods. I've smelled it all. And I'm telling you, I don't know what the hell that was. Deadfall and especially leafed out branches make a lot of noise on the way down. I've heard it many times. Hey guys, glad to see you made it to the end of the video. Have you ever had any strange experiences out in the deep woods? Make sure to let me know in the comments below. If you have any stories you'd like to be narrated, be sure to send them in. Alright guys, that just about wraps up the video. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So long, Fearseekers. I'll see you in the next video.
She's not dead.